And the last step is to import the variable that we need. So inside amazon.js, we need the products variable. So at the top, we're going to type import curly brackets, and then inside here, we're going to type the variable name that we want to get, which is products. And we're going to get this variable from single quotes, semicolon, and then inside here, we're going to locate the products.js file. So we're going to type ... and slash to go outside of the current folder, so outside of the scripts folder, and then we're going to go into the data folder. So we'll type data and a slash to go into the folder, and we're going to locate the file products.js and save. So now that we're importing this variable from this file, the rest of our code will work, and our website will start working again. So that's how we turn products.js into a module as well. So let's go into Git and take a look at our changes. So in amazon.html, we deleted the script tag, and then in products.js, we exported the variables that we wanted to get out, and then in amazon.js, we imported the variables that we need from the file. So let's type a message and save these changes into Git. Import products from products.js and commit. Let's close this, and let's open amazon.html. Now, the last thing is, you might be wondering, should we also delete this script tag that loads amazon.js? And the answer is no, because we still need one JavaScript file to load our code. So this file will import from all the other files that we created. And this is how we organize our code in a real website. So this file is called the entry point. So now that we've seen some examples of modules, we're going to use modules to organize our code better. So let's go into amazon.js. And then we're going to scroll down to the code for the Add to Cart button. So inside this file, we're going to scroll down here, all the way down to this code here. So this is a code that we run when we click Add to Cart. And you'll notice that we're running a lot of code here when we click that button. We're running code that adds the product to the cart, and we're also running code that calculates the quantity and updates the page. So a best practice in programming is that when we have a lot of code here that does different things, it's better to split these up into smaller functions to make our code easier to read. So here, this part of the code takes the product ID and then adds it to the cart. So it makes sense to split this into its own function. So let's scroll up, and at the top here, let's create a function for this code. So we'll type function, and let's call it add to cart, brackets and curly brackets. And then we're just going to move all this code into the function. So we'll select this code, and then right-click, cut, and then inside this function, right-click and paste. And then down here, we're going to run this function inside here. So when we click Add to Cart, we're going to run Add to Cart function that we just created and save. So now let's give this a try. So we'll click Add to Cart, and unfortunately, it doesn't work anymore. So let's take a look at the console to see if there's any errors. We'll right-click, inspect, and then open the console, and it's telling us that product ID is not defined. So if we look at our code here and scroll up in the function, you'll notice that we're using product ID, but it's no longer anywhere in the function. And that's because product ID is outside the function. So we actually want to keep this code outside because it's using this button. So instead, we're going to take product ID and put it into a function using a parameter. So at the top of the function, we're going to add a parameter product ID. And then when we call this function, we're going to pass it the product ID. So we're going to take this value, put it into the function, and save it in here, and then the function can run as normal. So now if we save, and then go to our project and click Add to Cart, you can see that it's working again. Next, let's go back and scroll down. And we're going to put the rest of our code into its own function as well to make it more organized. So at the top here, let's create some new lines and create a function. And this code updates the cart quantity on the page here. So let's name this function update cart quantity, brackets and curly brackets. And we'll move this code into the function. So let's select this code and then right click, cut, and then in here, right click and paste. And then down here, we'll call the function using update cart quantity and brackets and save. So as you can see, by splitting up our code into smaller functions, it makes our code a lot easier to read. When we click Add to Cart, it's really easy to understand what's going on. First, we're going to add a product to our cart, and then we're going to update the cart quantity. So now let's save, and then go back to our project and try it out. And you can see that everything is working again. So we're going to do two more things to better organize our code. So let's go back to our code. And the first thing is we're going to scroll up to the Add to Cart function. And I made a small mistake in the previous lesson. I actually want to rename this parameter from item to cart item instead to make it a little more clear. So we're just going to rename this to cart item. And here as well, rename it to cart item and save. And we'll scroll down here and we're going to do the same thing for this parameter. So we'll rename it to cart item. And then here, cart item and save. And the last thing we'll do is let's scroll up to the add to cart function. So you'll notice that this code manages our cart. So it's actually a best practice to move this function into cart.js because cart.js contains all the code that's related to the cart. A best practice is to group related code together into its own file. So here, let's take the function add to cart. We'll select it and then right click, cut. And then inside cart.js, we're going to right click and paste. And just move that function into this file because this file contains all the code that's related to the cart. So now that this function is inside the file, we need to access it from amazon.js. And we can do that using modules, using the features export and import. So inside cart.js, in front of the function, we're going to export it so we can use it in other files. So let's save this file. And then inside amazon.js, we're going to scroll to the top. And you'll notice that we're already importing something from cart.js. So we actually don't need to write import again. Here, we can actually import multiple things from this file by typing comma and space, and then something else that we want to import. So in our case, we're going to import the function add to cart. So here, we'll type comma, add to cart. So now it will import both the cart and the add to cart function from this file. So imports can import multiple things from a file. Imports have another syntax, import star as. This imports everything from a file and groups it together inside this object. And then we can access each import as a property or a method. So lastly, I'm just going to scroll down to my code here, and I'm just going to remove this extra new line and save. Now you might be wondering if we should move update cart quantity into cart.js as well. So this function actually handles updating the web page rather than managing the cart. So we're going to keep this function inside this file for now. So now let's go into Git and save our changes. So we'll go here, and inside cart.js, we moved the add to cart function, and then we exported it. And then inside amazon.js, we imported the add to cart function. And then down here, we took the big block of code that we had before, and we separated it into two functions, add to cart and update cart quantity. And this made our code a lot easier to read. So now let's type a message describing our changes. Move add to cart into cart.js and commit. Next, we're going to create the checkout page in our final project, and we're going to use modules to organize our code again. So let's open the final project, and we're going to click this cart icon in the top right. And this will take us to another page, which is the checkout page. So on this page, we can see the products that are in our cart. So if you're wondering how that cart icon works, it basically uses an HTML element called a link element, which looks like this. Link elements have a special attribute called href. When we click a link element, whatever is inside the href attribute, it will open it in the page. So if we put youtube.com inside the href and we click the link, it will open youtube.com in our browser. If we put a file like checkout.html inside href, it will look for a file called checkout.html and open that file. So in our project, if we look at our code and open our files, inside amazon.html, we're basically just using a link element or an A element. And this has an href of checkout.html. So what this does is it's going to look for a file called checkout.html beside the current file, amazon.html. So here's amazon.html, and it's going to look for checkout.html beside it, and then open that in our browser, which is how that cart icon works. So in our browser, at the top, you can see that it opened checkout.html. So that's basically how a link element works and how we can navigate from one page to another. You can learn more about link elements in my HTML and CSS full course. But for now, we're going to learn how to build the checkout page using JavaScript. So first, let's take a look at the code for this page. So again, the code is inside checkout.html. So in our code editor, we're going to open checkout.html. And this is the code for the page that we saw earlier that contains our cart. So just like with the home page, instead of writing all this HTML manually, we're going to use JavaScript to generate this HTML. So first, we need to add JavaScript to this page. So let's scroll down to the very bottom here. And right before the end of the body, we're going to create a script element to load some JavaScript. And we'll give it an attribute source equals double quotes, and then a file we want to load. So let's create a new JavaScript file for this page. So inside our scripts folder, let's click amazon.js and then click this icon to create a new file. And let's name this file checkout.js and press enter. And now we're going to load this page inside checkout.html. So here in the source attribute, we're going to locate this file. So first, we need to go into the scripts folder. So we'll type scripts and then a slash to go into the folder, and then we'll load the file checkout.js. And next, we're going to add another attribute, type equals double quotes module. So remember from earlier in the lesson, this attribute enables module features for this file. So now this file can import from other JavaScript files. So now let's save and let's open checkout.js. And we'll start creating this page with JavaScript. So let's go back to our page first and take a look at the structure of this page. So you can see on this page, we actually have two sections. We have the cart section on the left, which shows the products in our cart. And we also have the payment section on the right, which calculates the cost of our order. So let's use JavaScript to create the cart section first. So remember, the main idea of JavaScript is first, we're going to save the data, and then we're going to generate the HTML. And finally, we'll make it interactive. Let's start by saving the data that we need for this section of the page. So for this section, we're basically displaying a list of products along with the quantity of each product that we want to buy. And if you remember, we already created a data structure to represent this, which is our cart. Inside our cart, we have the ID of the product as well as the quantity that we want to buy. So we can just reuse this data structure to create this section. So let's go into our code and we're going to open cart.js. So inside here, we have an array called cart that's supposed to represent our data here. So right now, our cart is empty. So to make it easier for us to develop, we're just going to add some default values into this array. So inside here, let's create an object and put one product into our cart first. So looking at this page, the product that we want to put is the socks. So we'll go back into our code and I'll rearrange my windows so we can see it side by side. And we're going to get the product ID for the socks here. So we're going to go into products.js and then here's the socks. We're just going to take this ID, right click, copy, and then inside the cart. And remember, we structured our data so that each cart item has a product ID as well as a quantity. So here, we're going to create the same structure that our current code uses. So we're going to give each object a product ID, colon, and single quotes. And we're just going to right click and paste the ID that we copied earlier. And then we'll type a comma and we'll give it a quantity, colon, and for the first item, we're going to give it a quantity of 2. So we'll just create a cart that kind of matches what we see on this page. Next, let's create a second cart item to represent the basketball. So we'll type comma, curly brackets. We'll give it a product ID, colon, and single quotes. And then we're going to get the ID for this basketball. So inside products.js, we're going to scroll down to the basketball here. And we're going to copy this ID, right click, copy, and then inside cart.js, in here, right click and paste. And we'll give this one a quantity, colon, 1, and save. So what we're doing here is we're just creating some default values that we can use to write the code to generate this page. So this is just for development. When we're actually using the website, the cart will start off as empty. So if we compare our data to our page, you might notice that there's a few things that are missing, such as the product's image, the name, and the price. So how come we're not saving these into our data? And that's because we're using a special technique. We're just saving the product's ID, and then we can use this ID to search for this product inside the products array here. So using the ID, we can find all the other details of the product, like the image, the name, and the price. So there's no need to save this data twice inside the products array and inside the cart array. All we have to do is save the ID of the product that we want and then search for it. So this technique is called deduplicating the data or normalizing the data. And this is a very common technique in software engineering. Okay, so the one other thing that we probably need to save in our data is the delivery times and the delivery options. But we're going to leave this for the next lesson because it requires some more features that we're going to learn. So for now, we finished saving the data that we need. The next step is to use this data to generate the HTML. So let's open checkout.js. So I'm just going to drag it to the bottom here so we can see it side by side. So the first step we need to do is to take the cart array and import it into checkout.js so we can use it. So in here, let's import curly brackets, the cart array. And we're going to import it from single quotes and semicolon. And we're going to use a file path between the quotes to locate cart.js. So let's open our files again. And to get from here to here, we need to go out of the scripts folder. So to do that, we can type ... and then slash to go to the outer folder. And then we're going to go to the data folder. So we'll type data / to go into this folder, and we'll locate cart.js. So cart.js and save. And next, we're going to loop through this cart and generate the HTML, just like we did for the home page. So let's close this for now. And here, we're going to create a loop over the cart. So we'll type cart.for each brackets and a function. And then we'll give it a parameter. Let's call it cart item. And then for each cart item here, we're going to generate this HTML. So in here, let's create a template string for the HTML using backticks. And we'll create some new lines. And then here, we're going to copy and paste the HTML for one of these products. So first, let's find the HTML for one of these products. And to do that, we can right-click, inspect, and then click this top left icon. And then click the element we want to get the HTML for. So here's the HTML for one of these products. And we're going to search for this class cart item container in our code. So inside our code, let's open checkout.html. And we'll type Control F or Command F to search for code. And we'll search for the class cart-item-container, which is this code right here. So if we collapse it and collapse this, this is the code for these two products here. So we're going to take this HTML and we're going to move it into our JavaScript so we can generate it with JavaScript. So we'll right-click, copy, and then in here, right-click and paste. And if we need to fix the formatting, we can select all of these lines and then press Shift-Tab to remove some indents. And I'll add an indent here. Next, when we're generating this HTML, we want to replace this with the actual product's image and this with the actual product's name. So we're going to take this cart item and use it to get the data that we need. So let's open cart.js to see what each cart item looks like. So we have the product ID and the quantity. So first, we need to use this product ID to search for the product in order to get the other details like the image, the name, and the price. So to do that, let's get the product ID out of the cart item first. So we'll create a variable const product ID equals the cart item dot product ID. And now we need to use this to search for the full product. So the full product, if we open our files, is inside products.js, which is this array right here. So I'm just going to move this up here so we can see it side by side. So to search inside this array, we actually need to import products into checkout.js. So let's use some module features again. At the top, we'll import curly brackets, the products array, and we'll import it from single quotes and semicolon. And then here, we'll locate the products.js file. So we'll type .. to go out of the scripts folder. And then we'll go into the data folder, data, and then a slash to go into this folder. And we'll import from products.js. So products.js and save. So now we have access to this products array here. And we'll search the array for the full product details. So down here, let's create a variable to save the result. So we'll type let, and we'll name it matching product. And then down here, we'll loop through the products array. So we'll type products.for each brackets and a function, and then we'll give it a parameter, product. And now for each product here, we're going to check if the ID property is equal to our product ID here. So down here, we'll check if the product.id property is equal to our product ID up here. And then if they're equal, that means we found the matching product, and we're going to save it in this variable. So matching product equals this product that we're looping through. So now that we have the matching product, we have access to the image, the name, as well as the price that we can use to generate this HTML. So this is a good example of deduplicating or normalizing our data. So now at the bottom, let's console.log our matching product to see if it works. So matching product and save. Now if we go into our project and we right-click, inspect, and check our console, you can see that we were able to get the full product details for each of these products using the product ID. So now that we have the full product details, we can use this to generate all this HTML. So down here, instead of generating the same image every time, we're going to use the image in the matching product. So let's get rid of this code. And here, we're going to remove this, and we're going to substitute using $curly brackets the matching product dot image. And we'll scroll down, and instead of the same product name every time, we're going to replace this, and we're going to substitute the matching product dot name. So each time we're going to generate HTML with a different image and a different name. And down here, the same thing. Remove the price, and we'll replace it with matching product dot, and then we'll just check here what the property is. It's called price cents. And remember, this is in cents, and to display it as dollars, we have to convert it by dividing by 100 and save. And lastly, we're going to replace the quantity here. So if we scroll down, we can see that this is the quantity. So instead of 2 every time, we'll substitute. And for the quantity, remember it's not part of a product, it's part of our cart. So each cart item has a property called quantity. So down here, we're going to substitute the cart item dot quantity and save. So now we're generating all this HTML by looping through our cart. So the next step is we're going to combine all this HTML together and then put it on the page. So I'm just going to move this up here so we can see more of the code. So to combine all this HTML together, let's create a variable up here to store the result. So we'll type let, and let's call it the cart summary HTML equals an empty string. And now each time we loop through the cart, we're going to add this HTML up here so that we combine it. So here we'll type cart summary HTML plus equals this HTML that we generated. And at the bottom, I'll just add a semicolon. And then let's console.log the cart summary HTML. Console.log cart summary HTML to make sure that it worked. So we'll save, and then in here, we'll check the console, right-click, inspect the console, and now you can see that we generated the HTML, and each cart item is different depending on the product that is being displayed. So that's how we generate all the HTML for this section, and the last step is to take this and put it on the page using the DOM. So first, we need an element that we can put the HTML inside of. To find this element, let's right-click, inspect, and click the top left, and click one of these products. And let's find this order summary element, because this contains both of our products here. So we're going to replace all the HTML inside here with what we generated. So let's search for the class order summary in our code. So we'll go back to our code, and let's open checkout.html. And we'll type Control F or Command F to search for code, and we'll search for the class order-summary, and then it's right here. And we're going to add a class so we can select it using the DOM. So js-order-summary, and save. So now let's use the DOM and put this element in our JavaScript. So inside here, at the bottom, we'll use document.querySelector, brackets, and the class we just created, .js-order-summary, and we'll use the property .inner capital HTML, and we'll change the HTML to cart summary HTML, and we can remove this line. And now if we save, we're basically generating all this HTML with JavaScript and then putting it on the page. So now we can go back to checkout.html, and we can actually remove the code inside this order summary. So we can delete this code and save, and everything will still work because this is now being generated by JavaScript. So that's how we create the cart section of this page with JavaScript. Let's go into Git and save our changes. So we'll open the Git section, and then it will tell us that we changed 3 files. In checkout.html, we removed all the HTML that was written manually. And then at the bottom, we created a script tag to load our JavaScript. And then we also changed cart.js and added some default values to work with. And then we created checkout.js, which loops through the cart, creates the HTML, and puts it on the page. So let's create a message to describe our changes. Generate HTML for the order summary, and commit. Next, let's open our project again. And before we continue, we actually have 2 issues that we need to fix. The first issue is that the price is displaying as 1 decimal here instead of 2. And the second issue is that these delivery options are actually shared between the 2 products. For example, if I click this delivery option here, it will actually unselect for the second product. So they're sort of shared between the 2 products. But what we actually want is for each product to be able to select its own delivery options. So we're going to fix these 2 issues next. First, let's focus on the price, and we want to display it in 2 decimals. So we actually learned how to fix this on the home page using the method toFixed. So we're going to use the same code here. Let's go into our code, and we'll open our files. And let's open checkout.js again. So here, we're going to scroll down to where we display the price, which is here, price cents. And to show this in 2 decimal places, we're going to surround this with brackets to make sure we calculate it first, and then use the method .toFixed, brackets, and then 2 to show 2 decimal places. If we save and then open our project, now the price is displaying correctly. Before we move on, we're going to learn how to better organize this code. So if we go back, so notice that we're using this code inside the checkout page, as well as inside amazon.js, which is the home page. So we can actually share this code between the 2 files, so we don't have to repeat it. And to do that, we can use modules. So let's open checkout.js again. And what we'll do is we're going to create a function that does the same thing as this code. And then we can share this function between the 2 files. So let's create a file that's going to contain this shared function. So we're going to go to our scripts folder here, and inside, we're going to create a new folder this time. And let's call this folder utils, and press enter. So we're naming it utils because this code is sort of like a useful utility that we want to share. Now inside this folder, we're going to have different types of utils. So let's create a new file, and let's name it money.js. So this file is going to contain utilities that are related to money, which is this code right here. So let's press enter. And I'm just going to move this to the bottom so we can see it side by side. So now inside this utils file, we're going to create a function that does the same thing as here. And then we can share it between the 2 files. So here, we'll create a function, and let's name it format currency, because that's what this code is doing. And then brackets and curly brackets. So this function is basically going to do the same thing as here. So we're going to add a parameter here, price cents, because we want to use this function for any amount of price cents. And then in here, we're going to do the same thing, which is price cents divided by 100. And then we're going to surround this with brackets to make sure we calculate this first, and then display it in 2 decimal places using .toFixed, brackets, and 2. And finally, let's return this result. Return. And save. So what we just did is we created a function that does the same thing as this code here. And now we're going to share this function between checkout.js and amazon.js. So first, in order to share it, we need to export this function. So at the front, we're going to type export and save. And now inside each of these files, we're going to import this function and use it. So let's scroll to the top. And here, we're going to import curly brackets. We're going to import the function format currency, and we're going to import it from single quotes and semicolon. And then inside here, we're going to locate the file money.js. So here, we're in the checkout.js file, which is right here. And to go here, we're first going to go into the utils folder. So we're going to type utils and then a slash to go into this folder. And we're going to locate the file money.js. So money.js. Now for modules, we have to do one extra thing. At the front of this file path, we need to type /. So remember that .. represents the folder outside the current folder. So for checkout.js, if we go outside of this folder, we're going to go outside the scripts folder. Now, a single dot, on the other hand, means the current folder. So this dot means we're going to go into the current folder, which is the scripts folder, and then we're going to go into the utils folder, and then we're going to go and locate money.js. So for modules, if we want to start in the current folder, our file paths have to start with /. So that's one extra thing that we have to do. So now that we've imported the format currency function, let's use it in the rest of our code. So we're going to scroll down to here, and instead of writing this all over again, we're just going to use the function format currency, and then brackets, and we're going to remove the rest of the code here, and close bracket, and save. So we're basically running the same code, except we're using this shared function that's located in another file. So let's open our project, and we can see that the price is still displaying correctly. So now let's go back into our code, and we're going to share this function inside amazon.js as well. So let's open amazon.js, and then we'll scroll to where we show the price, which is here, and we're going to use this function again. So first we have to import it, so we'll scroll up to the top, and import curly brackets. We'll import the function format currency, and we'll import it from single quotes semicolon, and then here we'll locate the file money.js. So remember, for modules, if we want to start in the current folder, we have to type /. And then we're going to go to the utils folder. So utils, and then a / to go inside the folder, and locate the file money.js. And now we're going to use this function. So let's scroll down, and we're going to replace this code and use format currency and brackets. So we can remove the rest of the code here and save. And now let's look at our project, and we'll click up here to go back to the home page. And you can see that the prices are displaying as 2 decimal places. And that's it. If we look at our code again, we're essentially taking this function and sharing it across 2 files using modules. So using modules, we can reuse a lot of our code and reduce repetition. Next, let's work on the second issue that we saw earlier. So we'll go back to our project and click the top right to go back to the checkout page. And then here, the delivery options are shared between the 2 products, but we want each product to choose its own delivery options. So to fix that, let's go back into our code, and just going to resize it here so we can see it side by side. And we'll open checkout.js again, and we can close this for now. So this is an HTML element called a radial selector. And here's the code for a radial selector. So the way that radial selectors work is that if a set of radial selectors have the same name, then we can only select one of them. So for example, if these 3 radial selectors have the same name attribute, then we can only select one of them. Now, if the 3 at the top have one name and the 3 at the bottom have a different name, then we can select one from the first 3 as well as one from the second 3. Now, what's the problem with the radial selectors here? Well, let's take a look at the code for these selectors. To do that, we're going to right-click one of them, and then inspect, and then click the top left, and click one of these selectors to get the HTML code. So here we have the code for the radial selector, and you can see that the name of the selector is delivery option 1. And now if we click the top left again and find one of these bottom selectors, you'll notice that these also have the name delivery option 1. So all 6 of these have the same name attribute. That's why we can only select one of these 6 at a time. So what we actually want to do is we want the first 3 selectors to have one name and the second 3 selectors to have a different name. So let's figure out how to give these a different name. So inside the console, we can see the code for this selector. And we have a name attribute delivery-option-1. So let's actually find this name in our code. So we'll go to our code editor and Control F or Command F to search for code. And we'll search for delivery-option-1. And if we scroll down, you'll notice that every time we're generating these radio selectors, we're always using the same name, delivery option 1. So every product is going to have the same name for the radio selectors, and all of these are going to be shared. So what we actually want to do is, instead of using the name delivery option 1 every time, each product is going to use a different name for these 3 selectors. So one way we can do that is, instead of the number 1 every time, we can replace it with the product's ID, because the ID is always unique for each product. So let's substitute using $ and curly brackets the product.id. And then down here as well, instead of using the name 1 every time, we're going to substitute product.id. And actually, we use the name matching product. So we'll scroll down and just update this to matching product. And then down here, matching product. And as well down here, instead of 1 every time, substitute the matching product.id and save. So now these 3 radio selectors will have a different name attribute than these 3 radio selectors. That means we can select 1 out of these 3, and we can select 1 out of these 3. So that's how we fix that error. Instead of using the same name, delivery option 1 every time, we're going to generate a name using the product's ID. So let's go into Git and save our changes. So in Amazon.js, we imported this shared function, and we used it to format the price in 2 decimal places. And then in checkout.js, we also used the shared function here, and we fixed the radio selectors. And then in this file, money.js, we created this shared function. So let's create a message to describe our changes, fix price formatting, and radio selectors, and commit. The last step in our process is to make it interactive. So I'm just going to close these for now, and going to move it to the right again so we can see our project. And for the order summary, there's a few things we can make interactive. For now, we're going to start with this delete link. When we click this link, it should remove this product from the cart. So we're going to learn how to build this. So let's go back to our code. And first, let's add event listeners to all of these delete links. To do that, we're going to find the code for these delete links. So we'll right-click, inspect, and then in here, this is the code. So we're going to search for this class in our code editor, delete-quantity-link. So in here, let's open checkout.js, and we're going to Control F or Command F and search for delete-quantity-link, which is right here. Next, we're going to add a class to these elements so we can add event listeners. So at the end here, let's add a class js-delete-link and save. And then at the bottom, we're going to scroll down. And then down here, we're going to add the event listeners. So first, we're going to select all the delete links on the page using document.querySelector, all, brackets, and then a string. And we're going to select a class using and the class js-delete-link. And then we're going to loop through all these links. So dot for each brackets and a function. And in here, it will give us the link every time. And then for each of these links, we're going to add an event listener. So link dot add event listener brackets. And here we're going to give a string and the event we want to listen for, which is a click, and then a function that we want to run when we click these links. So for now, let's just console.log string delete to make sure that it's working. So we'll save this, and then in here, we click these delete links, and then open the console, right-click, inspect console. We can see that it's working now. So now let's go back to our code. So when we click delete, we're going to do two steps. The first step is we're going to remove the product from the cart. And the second step is we're also going to update our HTML and remove the product from the page. So let's start with the first step. So when we click delete, how do we know which product we need to remove from the cart? So we learned how to do this for the Add it to Cart button. We can attach the product's ID to the link element. So let's scroll up again to where the delete link is, which is right here. And we're going to attach the product's ID to this element using a data attribute. So at the end here, we're going to add data-product-ID equals double quotes. And then here, we'll substitute the matching product.id and save. And now that we attach the product ID to this element, we can get it in our JavaScript below. So let's scroll down. And then here, we're going to delete this line. And using the link element, we can get that product ID using link.dataset to access the data attributes. And we're going to access .productID. And let's save this in a variable so we can use it later. So const product ID equals this value. And let's console.log this to see if it works. And save. So now if we go to the project and click the delete link for the first product, and then look at the console, inspect and console, it will show us the product's ID. If we click the second product's delete link, it will show us the second product's ID. So now we have the ID that we need to remove from the cart. So now, how do we actually do that? So before we begin figuring that out, instead of writing all the code down here, let's actually create a function inside cart.js to do this task. The reason we're going to do this is because cart.js is supposed to contain all the code that's related to the cart. So this will help us organize our code better. So let's open our files again, and we're going to open cart.js. And we're going to scroll to the bottom, and we're going to create a function for removing a product from the cart. So let's type function, and let's name it remove from cart, brackets and curly brackets. So this function will take a product ID, which we have, and remove it from the cart. So here, let's create a parameter for the ID, product ID, and now in here, we're going to figure out how to remove it. So here's one way we can do this. First, we can create a new array, and then we can loop through our cart, and then add each product to the new array, except for this product ID. So now let's convert these steps into code. So inside this function here, let's create a new array using const, we'll call it new cart equals an empty array. The next step is we're going to loop through our cart. So we'll type cart.forEach brackets and a function. and we'll give it a parameter cart item. And the last step is that we're going to add each cart item to the new array, except if it has this product ID. So we can do that by checking if the cart item dot product ID is not equal to the product ID that we're looking for, product ID. So if it's not equal to the product we're trying to remove, we're going to add it to the new cart. So new cart dot push cart item. So the result of this loop is it's going to contain all the cart items that don't match this product ID. And that's the same thing as removing this from the cart. So now the last step is we're going to take our new cart and replace the cart up here. So we'll scroll down, and then here we'll make cart equal to our new cart. Because we're reassigning this variable, we have to scroll up and change it from const to let and save. So now that we created this function, let's use it in our checkout page. First, we're going to use the modules feature and export this function and save. And then inside checkout.js, we're going to import this function. So I'm just going to move this down to the bottom so we can see it side by side. So here. So in checkout.js, we're going to scroll up, and we're already importing from cart.js. So we're just going to import one additional thing by typing comma, and we're going to import this function, remove from cart, and save. And then we're going to use this function at the bottom. So we'll scroll down, and then here, we're going to remove from cart brackets, and we're going to give it the product ID we want to remove. So product ID. And lastly, let's just console.log the cart to make sure that this works. So console.log the cart and save. So now let's go into our project, and we're going to click this delete link for the first product. So delete, and let's open the console. Right-click, inspect the console, and now it's going to show us that we have one product remaining in the cart. And this product has a quantity of 1, which is the second product here. So by clicking that delete link, we successfully removed this product from the cart. So now if we refresh and tried clicking the second delete link and look at the console and then expand the cart, it will tell us that the remaining product has a quantity of 2, which is this product. So we successfully removed the second product from the cart when we clicked delete. So now let's go into Git and look at our changes. So we'll go into this section. Well, I can close this for now, and we'll open Git, and it will tell us that in cart.js, we changed it to let, and we created this new remove from cart function. And then in checkout.js, we import that function, and then at the bottom, when we click the delete link, we're going to remove this product from the cart. Now, finally, we can remove this console.log, save, and we're going to put these changes into Git. So we'll type a message to describe our changes, delete products from cart when clicking delete, and commit. The second thing we have to do when we click delete is to update our HTML. So if we go back to our project, when we click delete, we want to remove this product from the page. So one way we can do this is first, we're going to use the DOM to get the element we want to remove. And then we can use a method called .remove. So every element that we get from the DOM has a method called .remove, which removes it from the page. So first of all, how do we know which element to get from the page? So let's actually look at the HTML for one of these products. We're going to right-click, inspect, and then click the top left, and then click one of these products here. And this will give us the HTML. So these two products are represented by these two divs here, with the class cart-item-container. So one way to identify which product this is for is to add a special class to this element, and this class will contain the product ID. And then if we go back to our code and we open checkout.js and scroll to the bottom, when we click delete, we have the product ID here. So we can use this to select that special class that we're going to add. So first, let's add that special class to each of these elements. So we're going to scroll up to the HTML, and we're going to go to the top here to the div cart-item-container. And then here we'll add a special class js-cart-item-container dash, and then we'll substitute the product's ID. So we'll type the matching product.id. And let's put this class on a separate line, so the line is not too long. Now let's save. And now we're going to scroll to the bottom and use our code to get this class. So we'll scroll to the bottom. And here we're going to use the DOM as well as this product ID to get that special class that we just added above. So here we can type document.querySelector brackets, and then inside we'll type a string, and we'll select the class using a .js-cart-item-container dash, and then we're going to substitute the product ID. So because we want to insert something in here, we're going to switch this to a template string using backticks. And now we can substitute this product ID into this string. Product ID. So by creating the string like this, we're able to select the specific container that we need. So now let's save this in a variable so we can use it later. So const container equals this result. So for now, let's actually console.log this to see if it works. Console.log container and save. And then we'll go back to our project. So just move this here. And then in our project, if we click delete on the first product and then check the console, right click, inspect, and the console, you can see that we're getting the correct element that we should delete. If we go down here and click this delete link and check the console, you can see that this is also getting us the correct element that we want to delete. So now that we have the element we want to delete, the next step is to use the .remove method. So again, every element we get with the DOM has a method called .remove, which will remove it from the page. So if we go back into our code, down here, all we have to do is type out the element container.remove and brackets, and this will remove it from the page. If we save and try it out, so we'll go in here, we'll click delete on the first product, and it will remove it from the page. If we click delete on the second product, it will also remove it from the page. So that's it. Now let's refresh to bring the products back, and that's how we make the delete link interactive and remove the products from the cart as well as from the page. So now let's save our changes into Git. We'll go to the Git section, and it will tell us that in checkout.js, at the top, we added that special class, which contains the product ID. And if we scroll down to the bottom, we created the string, which will get us the specific element that we want to remove. And then we use the .remove method. So now let's create a message to describe our changes. Delete products from HTML when clicking delete and commit. The last thing we're going to do in this lesson is we're going to add local storage to our cart. So if we go back to our project, if we delete some products in our cart and then refresh, notice that our cart goes back to what it was before. And that's because right now, if we look at our code and we open cart.js, our cart is just a variable, and variables are reset when we refresh the page or when we go to a different page. So again, if we go back to our project and we go to a different page by clicking the top left, so on this home page, we can add as many products as we want to our cart. And if we go back to the checkout page, our cart will just get reset to whatever it is here. So that's the problem with just using a variable to save our cart. It gets reset when we refresh the page or we go to a different page. To solve this problem, we're going to use local storage to save our cart. So first, let's create a function for saving the cart to local storage, because we might want to reuse this code. So down here, let's create a function. We'll call it save to storage, brackets and curly brackets. And we're just going to save the cart to local storage using local storage dot set item, brackets. And set item takes two strings. The first string is the name of whatever we want to save. So we're going to save our cart. So we're just going to call this the cart. And then the second string is the data that we want to save. So remember that local storage can only save strings. So to save our cart, we need to convert it into a string first. And we can do that using json.stringify, brackets, and then inside we're going to give it the cart. So this will convert the cart into a string, and now we can save it in local storage. So now let's use this function. Whenever we update the cart, we need to save it to local storage so it doesn't get reset when we refresh the page. So here, when we add it to the cart, at the bottom, after we update the cart, we're going to use that function we created above. Save to storage and brackets. And also in the function remove from cart. So this function is also updating the cart. So after we update the cart, we're also going to save to storage and brackets and save. So now whenever we update the cart, we're going to save it in local storage. The last thing we need to do is at the top, at the beginning of our code, we need to get the cart from local storage instead of using this default value. So let's add some new lines here to separate the code for a bit. And here, we're going to get the cart from local storage. And we can do that using local storage dot get item and brackets. So get item takes one string, and that is the name of what we saved earlier, which is the cart. So we're going to give it the string cart. So this will give us the cart that we saved. However, remember that local storage can only save strings. So it will give us the string version of our cart, and we need to convert it back into an array. To convert it back to an array, we can use the code json.parse and brackets and close bracket. The last thing we need to do is when we first use the website, we might not have a cart in local storage. So if we don't have a cart saved, local storage will give us null. So in this situation, if this value is null, we want to give the cart a default value, which is this value below. So to give the cart a default value if it's empty, we can use an if statement by typing if, brackets and curly brackets, and in here, we can check if not cart. So if we don't have a cart in local storage, this will give us null. In this case, not null will become truthy, and we're going to run the code in this if statement. So if the cart is empty, we're going to make the cart equal this default value below. So let's just select this code and we'll right click, cut, and then in here, right click and paste. And remove the extra line and save. So now if the cart is empty, we'll just give it a default value. If we go back to our project and try out our code, so let's delete the first product and refresh the page, notice that the cart gets saved and the first product remains deleted. If we go to the home page and we add some new products and then go to our cart, notice that our cart is saved between pages. So by using local storage, we can save our cart even when we refresh the page or go between different pages. So that's all we're going to build in this lesson. So to clean up, let's delete all these products in the cart and then go to the home page, and we'll add back 2 socks and 1 basketball, which is the default value of the cart. Let's go back to the checkout page, and now we're done with this part of the page. So finally, let's save our changes into Git. We'll go to the Git section, and it will tell us that inside cart.js, we're now loading the cart from local storage when we open the page. If the cart doesn't exist, we're going to give it a default value, and we created a function to save the cart into local storage. So now let's add a message to describe our changes. Save cart in local storage and commit. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we learned about modules, which is a better way to organize our code. We created the checkout page in our final project. We learned about HTML link elements and radial selectors. We made the delete link interactive, and we saved the cart in local storage. Here are some exercises to help you practice what we learned in this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn about external libraries, and we're going to finish the checkout page in our final project. An external library is basically just code that is outside of our project. So far, we've only been using code that is inside our project, like these files. Well, a lot of developers write JavaScript code and then put their code on the internet, and we can actually load their code from the internet into our project and use it. We call this code an external library because it's code that is outside of our project. Let's do an example and load our first external library. We're going to go to the video description and we're going to click this link. For the Hello external library. And it will open up a page that contains JavaScript code. So I actually wrote this code myself, and you'll notice that this is just normal JavaScript code. We create a function called hello, and it just console.logs hello. So this is called an external library. It's code that is outside of our project. So the cool thing is, we can actually load this code from the internet into our project. So let's give that a try. We're going to go to our project, and we're going to open checkout.html. And we're going to scroll to the bottom, and above the script tag, we're going to add another script tag to load some code. So script, and we'll give it a source attribute, And then in here, instead of using a file path like we've done before, we're going to give this a URL of a website that contains JavaScript code. So if we go back to our browser, and here, the URL of this page is up here. So we're just going to copy this, right-click, copy, and then paste it into our code. Right-click and paste. So now, the computer will get all the JavaScript code from this URL or from this page. So it's going to get all the code from this page and load it into our project like normal code. So let's save, and let's give this a try. So this code creates a function called hello. So let's try running this hello function in our project. We'll go to checkout.js, and then scroll to the top, and then here, let's just run the function hello. So hello and brackets, and save. Now if we go back to our project, go to the checkout page, and check the console, right-click, inspect, and the console, you'll see that it displayed the message hello. So that's how an external library works. It's just code that is outside of our project. And we can load this code using a script tag like this. We just give it the URL of where this code is located. So there's two things you might be wondering about. How can we put this script tag at the top? So generally, we load external libraries first, and then we can use the library in our own code below. And the second thing is, how do you put code on the internet like this? To learn this, you can check out my video on how to put a website on the internet. It'll show you how to put any file like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files onto a website like this. Next, let's talk about why we use external libraries. External libraries let us share code. Instead of writing all the code ourselves, we can use code that other people wrote, and this helps us save time and avoid duplicating work. Right now, we're loading a very simple library, so let's load a more complex library to show how we can save a lot of time and work. Let's go back to our project and go to the checkout page. Here, we have a section for choosing a delivery option for this product. And you notice that each option has a date. So this is the date that the product should be delivered by. So the way this works is that the cheapest option here takes 7 days to deliver. The $4.99 option takes 3 days to deliver, and the $9.99 option takes 1 day to deliver. So to get these dates here, we need to do 3 things. First, we need to somehow get today's date in our JavaScript. Number 2, we need to do calculations with the date, such as add 7 days or add 3 days. And number 3, we need to display the date in an easy-to-read format like this. Now, we could try to figure out how to do this ourselves by writing our own code, but this is going to be a lot of work. Instead, we can use an external library to help us work with dates. So in this project, we're going to use an external library called day.js. This is a popular library that helps us work with dates. So first, let's load day.js into our project. We're going to go to the video description, and we'll click this link. For the day.js external library. And when the page opens, you'll see a bunch of random code here. Now you might think that this is some special code, but this is actually just regular JavaScript code that has been compressed. So basically all the extra spaces have been removed and the variable names have been shortened to 1 letter. We compress JavaScript code like this because we need to load this code from the internet into our project. By compressing it, it makes this code smaller, so it will load into our project faster. So this compression process is called minification, or we minify the code. Okay, so this is the code for the external library day.js. Now let's load this code into our project. We'll go back to our code, and then go to checkout.html, And then here, we're going to add another script tag, less than script, and the source attribute. And then here, we're going to give it the URL of the code we want to load. So let's go back to the code for day.js. And then up here, we're going to right-click and copy this URL. And then inside our code, in the source attribute, we're going to right-click and paste the URL and save. So again, this will take all the code that's located on this page and then load it into our project. Now let's give it a try. The day.js external library creates a function called day.js. So we'll go to checkout.js, and then at the top, we're going to run the day.js function and brackets. Now make sure this is all lowercase, because that's the name that the library used. So now let's actually console.log the result of this function. Console.log and save. And we'll go back to our project. In the checkout page, we're going to check our console. And you'll see that the day.js function gives us an object. And this object represents the current date and time. So we know that day.js is working. And that's it. We successfully loaded the day.js external library into our project. Now let's learn how to use day.js. External libraries usually have a documentation page that shows us how to use the library. We can find the documentation page by searching on Google the library name like day.js and then documentation. Or we can ask an AI tool how to use the library. To make things easier in this video, I'm going to show you the features that we need, and you can go through the documentation later if you want. So earlier we said we needed to do 3 things with a date. First, we want to get today's date. Number 2, we want to do calculations with the date. And number 3, we want to display the date in an easy-to-read format. Day.js helps us do all of these things. So first, let's use day.js to get today's date. According to the documentation, to get the current date and time, we can just use the day.js function, like this. So if we go back to our code, that's what we have here. We call day.js, and it gives us an object that represents the current date and time. The second thing we need to do is to do calculations with the date. So for the delivery options here, we need to calculate today's date plus 7 days, or today's date plus 3 days. So again, the day.js library can help us do this. So let's go back to our console and look at the object that we get back from day.js. So this object represents today's date and time. And this object also has a method called add, which adds a certain amount of time to this date. So this is what we need for the project to calculate these dates here. Let's go to our code. And first, let's save this result in a variable. So we're going to remove this and create a variable const today equals day.js. And then down here, we're going to use the add method. So we'll type today.add and brackets. Now the add method takes 2 parameters. The first one is the number of time that we want to add. So if we want to add 7 days, we're going to type 7. And then the second parameter is the length of time that we want to add. So if we want to add 7 days, we're going to give it a string days. So this will add 7 days to today's date. So let's save this result in a variable. Const delivery date equals this result, and we'll console.log it to make sure it's working correctly. Console.log the delivery date and save. Now if we go back to our project and open the console, it will give us an object that represents 7 days after today, or 7 days after when you're watching this video. So that's how we use day.js to do calculations with the date. It gives us methods like add to add a certain amount of time to the date. Finally, we're going to use day.js to display this date in an easy-to-read format like this. So according to the documentation, this date object has another method called .format, which will display the date in an easy-to-read format. So let's go back to our code, and we'll remove the console.log, and we'll type delivery date dot format. And then inside these brackets, we're going to give this method a string. So this string tells Day.js what kind of format we want for the date. So in the documentation, it has a table showing us some special characters we can put into this string. For example, if we want to show the day of the week, like Monday or Tuesday, we can type 4 Ds into the string. And this will give us a string where this text is replaced by the actual day of the week. If we want to add a comma and a space to this format, we can just add a comma and space, and this will show up directly in the result. Now let's say that after this, we want to show the month. According to the documentation, to show the month, we can type 4 capital M's. And it will replace this with the month. And finally, we'll type a space. And according to the documentation, if we want to insert the day of the month into the string, we can type a capital D. So this method takes this date and converts it into a string with this format. So now let's console.log this to see what it looks like. Well, console.log and brackets and save, and then go into our project and open the console. And now you should see the date 7 days after today, but displayed in an easy-to-read format. So that's how we use the Day.js external library to help us work with dates. And as you can see, it saves us a lot of time and work. We don't have to figure out how to work with dates ourselves. We can just use someone else's code to solve this problem. So a best practice in programming is when we need to do something complicated, try to find an external library first before writing the code ourselves. To find external libraries, we can search in Google, JavaScript, and then what kind of library we're looking for, like date library. We can also use an AI tool to help us find external libraries. Next, we're going to learn how to use external libraries and JavaScript modules together. Right now, if we look at our code and go to checkout.html, we're loading these libraries using script tags. The problem with script tags is that it runs this code directly on the page, and this might cause naming conflicts. For example, the hello library creates a function called hello. So if something else is called hello in any of our other code, it might cause a naming conflict. A better way to load external libraries is to use JavaScript modules, because a module will contain this code inside a file, and any variables that are created inside the file will not conflict with anything outside of the file. To use external libraries and JavaScript modules together, we're going to use a special version of the library called an ESM version. ESM stands for ECMAScript modules. ECMAScript is just another name for JavaScript. So the ESM version of a library is just a version that works with JavaScript modules. So let's do an example. We're going to go to the video description, and we're going to open the ESM version of hello.js. So you can see that it's the exact same code as before. We're creating a function called hello, except this time I just added the word export in front of function. So this turns the library into an ESM version, and now it will work with JavaScript modules. So let's use the ESM version in our code. We're going to go back to our code, and we're not going to use script tags to load this anymore. So let's delete this and save. And then in checkout.js, at the top, we're going to use an import to import this function into our code. So we'll type import curly brackets. We'll import the function hello, and we're going to import it from a string. And then this time, instead of giving it a file path like before, we're going to give it a URL that contains our code. So on the web page, we're going to right-click and copy the URL at the top. And then inside our code, in here, we're going to right-click and paste. So this import works the same way as before, except now the code is coming from the internet rather than one of our files. So let's save and then go back to our project and check the console. And you can see that everything is still working. So that's how we use external libraries and JavaScript modules together. We just load the ESM version of the library, and we use import as normal, except this time we're importing from code that is on the internet. Next, let's use day.js with JavaScript modules. To do that, we're going to load the ESM version of day.js. So we're going to go to the video description and click this link for the day.js ESM version. And now we're going to load this code into our project. So let's go back into our code. And first, let's open checkout.html. And we're going to remove the script tag because we're going to load this with JavaScript modules. So let's save and then go into checkout.js. And then at the top, we're going to import from the day.js ESM version. So we'll import, and we're going to use a slightly different syntax. We're just going to type day.js without the curly brackets. And then we'll type from a string, and we're going to give it the URL that contains the code. So we'll go to our browser and then click the URL at the top. We're going to right-click, copy, and then in our code, inside these quotes, right-click and paste. And save. So now let's open our project and take a look at the console to make sure it works. So we'll right-click, inspect the console, and everything is still working. So that's how we use the day.js external library with JavaScript modules. So before we continue, we're going to learn about this new syntax that we used here. So this syntax is called a default export. A default export is another way of exporting something from a file. We can use it when we only want to export one thing from a file. And it makes the syntax a little bit cleaner because we don't have to type the curly brackets. So let's do an example of a default export to see how it works. We're going to open the utils folder and open money.js. And at the bottom, we're going to create a default export by typing export default, and then whatever we want to export. So let's say we want to export this function here. So we just type the name of the function, format currency, and save. And now when we import this, we can just import the name without the curly brackets. So the syntax is a little bit cleaner. Now each file can only have one default export. So if we only want to export one thing from a file, this is another syntax that we can use. So some people like using default exports because they feel that exporting only one thing from a file makes the code cleaner. However, in your own code, it's up to you which version of export you want to use. Let's go back to checkout.js. And then here, the day.js library only exports one thing, which is the day.js function. So they chose to use a default export instead of a normal export that we were using before. By the way, the syntax up here with the curly brackets is called a named export. So when we use external libraries in the future, some libraries will use named exports like this, and other libraries will use a default export like this. So it's useful to know both syntaxes. So that's how we use external libraries and JavaScript modules together. we just import from the ESM version of the library. Now keep in mind that not every library has an ESM version, so for some libraries, we still have to use a script tag. Okay, now that we learned external libraries, let's do some practical examples. We're going to go back to the checkout page, and we're going to use day.js to create the delivery options here. So the way this works is that we can select one of 3 delivery options. When we click an option, it should change the delivery date up here, and it should change the prices on the right side. So let's get started. As always, we're going to do 3 steps. First, we're going to save the data, and then we're going to generate the HTML. And finally, we're going to make it interactive. So first, what data do we need to save for this section? Well, each delivery option has a delivery time, like 7 days or 3 days. And each option also has a price. So right now, here's what our cart looks like. Now we could save the delivery option details inside the cart like this. However, notice that this data gets duplicated for each product in the cart. Instead, we're going to save the delivery options separately, and then just save an ID that points to the delivery option. As a reminder, this technique is called normalizing the data. We save the delivery options separately, and then we just save an ID that points to the full delivery option. So let's create the data for the delivery options. We'll go into our code, and then in the data folder, let's create a new file for this. And we're going to name this file delivery options.js and press enter. And in here, we'll create a list of delivery options that we can pick from. We'll create a variable const delivery options equals an array because we want a list. And then each delivery option is going to have multiple values, like the time to deliver as well as the price. So we're going to make each of them an object to group these values together. So I'm going to rearrange my windows here so that we can see the data that we're trying to save. And we can actually close these tabs for now. So here, let's save the data for the first delivery option. First, let's give it an ID property, because as we mentioned, we're going to save the ID in the cart, and then we're going to use that ID to get the full delivery option here. So to keep things simple, let's just give it a string and an ID of 1. And then we're going to give it another property, and we're going to save the delivery time. So for the first option, it's going to take 7 days to deliver. So let's create a property, delivery days, colon, 7, and comma, and we're also going to save the price. So this one is free, so we're going to save the price, cents, and 0. Remember that a best practice when calculating money is to save it in cents. And next, let's save the data for the second delivery option here. We'll type a comma and another object, and let's give it an ID of 2 this time. And this one is going to take 3 days to deliver. So we'll type delivery days, colon 3, and we'll give it a price, cents, and this one is $4.99, so $4.99. And then finally, we're going to save the data for the third delivery option, comma, another object, ID of 3, and this one is going to take 1 day to deliver. So we'll type delivery days, colon 1, comma, and the price cents is $9.99. So price cents, $9.99, and save. So now that we've created our delivery options, for each product in the cart, we're going to save the ID of the delivery option that's selected. So for example, here we selected the first option. We're going to save an ID of 1 in our cart. So let's go back into our code, and we're going to open the cart. So here in the default cart, we're going to save the delivery option ID, colon, And let's say that the first product selected the first delivery option. So we're going to save the ID 1. And then for the second product, we're also going to save a delivery option ID, colon. And then let's say that for the second product, we chose the second delivery option here. So here, we're going to give it an ID of 2. Next, when we add a product to the cart, we also need to give it a delivery option ID. So if we scroll down to the add to cart function, here we're adding a product to the cart. So when we add a new product, we also want to give it a delivery option ID. So we'll type delivery option ID, colon, and for new products, let's give it a default delivery option of 1. So for new products, they'll select the first one. And now let's save. And lastly, we might have a cart that is saved in local storage. So we'll need to add the delivery option ID to local storage as well. But to keep things simple, let's just do a shortcut. We're going to delete the cart in local storage, and then it will go back to using this default value, which has the delivery option IDs. So to delete the cart from local storage, we're going to go into our page and open the console, right-click, inspect the console, and we're going to type local storage dot remove item, brackets, and the cart, and press enter. So this will erase the cart from local storage, and it will use those default values. So now let's go to our page and refresh, and it should be using the default cart. So that's how we save the data for the delivery options. By the way, in the rest of this course, if you get an error in your project, but your code looks correct, you may have some bad data saved in local storage. To fix this, you can try running localstorage.clear in your console to remove everything from local storage, and then refresh the page. The next step is to generate the HTML. First, let's find the HTML for the delivery options here. To do that, we can right-click this part of the page and inspect, and this will give us the HTML for this part. So we're going to find the element that represents this part of the page, and that's this one right here. It's a div with the class delivery-options. And to find this in our code, we're going to search for this class. So let's go back to our code, and then we're going to open checkout.js, which is right here. And we'll press Control F or Command F to find code, and we're going to look for the class delivery-options. And it will give us this code right here. So this is the HTML for the delivery options. So now instead of writing this HTML directly, we're going to generate this with JavaScript. To keep our code organized, let's create a function for generating this HTML. We'll scroll to the bottom, and then here, we'll create a function, and let's call it delivery options HTML, brackets and curly brackets. And now inside here, we're going to do 3 steps. First, we're going to loop through the delivery options we created earlier. And then for each option, we're going to generate some HTML. And then finally, we're going to combine all the HTML together. So first, let's import the delivery options at the top. So we'll scroll up, and we're going to import curly brackets from quotes, and we're going to locate the delivery options file, which is inside the data folder. So first we need to get out of the scripts folder. We'll type .. and then go into the data folder /delivery options.js. And we're going to import the delivery options. Now, one thing I forgot to do is that inside these delivery options, we need to make sure that we export this variable. So we're going to type export and save. And we'll go back to checkout.js. And then here, we're going to loop through the delivery options below. So we'll scroll back down to this new function, and type delivery options dot for each, brackets, and a function inside. And we'll name the parameter delivery option. So for each delivery option, we're going to generate some HTML. So let's use a template string to save the HTML. And then we're going to scroll up and we're going to find the class delivery-option. So this is the HTML for one delivery option. So we're just going to copy this HTML into our JavaScript below. So we'll right click, copy, and then down here, inside the string, give some new lines, and right click and paste. And if we need to reformat, we can select these lines and press tab. Okay, now when we're generating the HTML, instead of using the same date every time, we're going to calculate the date using day.js and then insert it into here. To calculate the date, we're going to get today's date first using day.js. So up here, let's create a variable const today equals, and according to the documentation, to get today's date, we can just call the day.js function. So we'll type day.js and brackets. Next, each delivery option takes a certain amount of days to deliver. So we need to add that to today's date. To do that, we have a method called .add. So below this, let's create a variable to save the result. Const delivery date equals today dot add brackets, and we're going to give it two parameters. The first parameter is how many days we want to add, and this is saved in the delivery option. So here we'll give it the delivery option dot delivery days, comma, and then we'll give it the length of time we want to add, which is a string days. Now that we calculated the correct delivery date, we need to display it in an easy-to-read format. And again, day.js has a method called format that lets us do this. So below, let's create a variable const, and we'll call it date string, and make it equal to delivery date dot format brackets, and we'll give it a string. So the format we want is we want to insert the day of the week. So according to the documentation, we can use 4 Ds and then a comma and a space, and then we want to insert the month. And according to the documentation, that's 4 capital M's. And finally, we're going to insert the day of month, which is capital D. So now that we calculated this date string, we're going to insert it into the HTML instead of using this same date every time. So we'll remove this and then insert the date string. Next, let's insert the price because it's going to be different prices every time. So at the top, let's create a variable const, and we'll call it price string and make it equals. And remember, each delivery option has a property price cents. So if the price cents is 0, we want to display the text free. If the price cents is not 0, we want to display the price as dollars with a dash. So to do that, let's practice using a ternary operator. So first, we'll check if the price cents is 0. So we'll type delivery option dot price cents is triple equals to 0. And then we'll type a new line and question mark, and also a new line and colon. So remember, the way that a ternary operator works is that if the first part returns true, the value is whatever is after this question mark. If the first part is false, then the value is whatever is after the colon. So it's sort of like an if statement, except we can save the result in a variable. So if the price cents is 0, that means it's free. So we want to display the text free. So we'll create a string free. And if the price cents is not 0, we want to display the price as dollars. So here, we're going to type a template string, a $sign, and we're going to insert the price cents as dollars. So here we'll type delivery option dot price cents. And to display this as dollars, we already have a function for this called format currency. So at the front, we're just going to type format currency, open bracket, and close bracket. And then at the end, let's add a dash. So here, we'll add space and dash and semicolon. So that's how we create the price string for each delivery option. So now let's substitute this into the HTML. So we'll remove this and substitute the price string and save. So now, instead of using the same values every time, we're substituting the values into the HTML. Finally, let's combine all this HTML together. So we're going to scroll up to the top, and outside of this loop, we're going to create a variable to save the result. So let HTML equals empty string to start, and then every time we loop through, we're going to add this HTML to this result. So here, we're going to type HTML plus equals. And finally, after we've created this HTML, we're going to return it from this function. So at the bottom, we're just going to return the HTML and save. Now that we generated the HTML for the delivery options, let's insert this into the HTML above. So instead of creating this HTML directly, we're going to delete it. And then here, we're going to insert, and we're going to run this function to generate it. So here, we're going to type delivery options HTML and brackets. Now, before we save, one thing that we're missing in this function is that if we scroll down, here we're using a variable called matching product. But this variable is not accessible inside this function. So let's actually pass the matching product into here. So at the top, we're going to add a parameter, matching product. And then when we call this function up here, we're going to pass in the matching product. So matching product. So now let's save and check our page. And now we're generating the HTML for these delivery options. And you'll notice that your delivery dates here will be based on today's date, or when you're watching this video. So this will be 7 days after today, or 7 days after when you're watching this video. This will be 3 days after today, or 3 days after when you're watching this video. And this will be 1 day after today. Now, one thing we need to fix here is that these selectors are empty. However, we want the delivery option that is saved in the cart to be checked. To do that, let's go back to our code. And in order to make one of these selectors selected, we're going to scroll down to the input element, and we're going to add an attribute called checked. And this attribute makes a selector checked. However, we don't want all of these delivery options to be checked. We only want it to be checked if it matches the delivery option ID that is saved in the cart. So let's write some code up here to figure out which delivery option should be checked. We're going to create a variable const is checked equals, and we only want it to be checked if this delivery option's ID matches the delivery option ID in the cart. So we'll test if delivery option.id is equal to the cart items.delivery option ID. Now inside this function, we actually don't have access to cart item. So let's actually pass it in as a parameter. Cart item up here. And then when we call the function, this outer function has access to the cart item. So we're going to give it the cart item. So we're going to put it into this function, and then we can use it down here. So now that we have this variable, instead of being checked all the time, we're going to remove this and insert, and we're going to use a ternary operator here. Is checked, question mark, and colon. So we can also use a ternary operator when we're inserting into a string. So again, if this is true, it's going to get the value after the question mark. So if it is checked, we're going to give it the value checked. If this is false, we're going to give it the value of empty string. So it's the same thing as if this attribute didn't exist. So now if we save, you'll notice that the correct delivery option is checked for each product. The first product, we saved delivery option 1, and the second product, we saved delivery option 2. Finally, let's replace this date at the top with the delivery date that we selected here. We'll go back to our code, and we'll scroll to the top until we see this date in our code here. So now we're going to calculate this date using the delivery option that we picked. So remember that inside the cart, we only saved the delivery option ID. So let's use this to get the full delivery option. So at the top here, let's get the delivery option ID out of the cart. Const delivery option ID equals cart item dot delivery option ID. Next, we're going to use this ID to find the full delivery option. Now we did something similar with the product ID. We looped through the products, found a matching ID, and then saved it in a variable up here. So we'll do the same thing. Let's create a variable to store the result. Let delivery option, and then we're going to loop through the delivery options. So delivery options dot for each brackets and a function, and let's name the parameter option because we use the name delivery option up here. So in here, we're going to look for a matching ID. So if this option.id is equal to the delivery option ID here, we're going to save this inside this variable. So delivery option equals option. So now we have the full delivery option in our code, and we can use it to get the delivery days property and then calculate the day that we need here. To calculate this date, we already wrote some code for this at the bottom. If we scroll down in our code, when we created the delivery options, we calculated the date for each delivery option. So we can reuse this code above. So let's select this code and then right-click, copy, and then at the top, after we get the delivery option, we're just going to right-click and paste that code again. And if we need to, we can reformat by selecting these lines and press Shift-Tab. So this code will take the delivery option that we selected and calculate the delivery date that we need to show down here. And now instead of using the same date every time, we're going to remove this and insert the date string that we created above. So date string and save. So now this date string up here will match the delivery date that we chose on the right side. So that's how we generate the HTML for the delivery options using the day.js external library. So now let's take a look at our changes in Git. We'll go to our code and open the Git section. And here it'll tell us in cart.js, we added delivery option IDs to the cart, as well as when we add to the cart. And then in this file, we created the list of delivery options. And in checkout.js, instead of writing this HTML directly, we generated it. And then in money.js, we learned about default exports. So let's type a message to describe our changes. save data and generate HTML for delivery options and commit. The last step is to make it interactive. So when we click a delivery option, we need to do two things. First, we need to update the delivery option ID in the cart array. And number two, we need to update the page. So we need to update this date here to match the date that we select. Let's start with the first step. Let's create a function for updating the delivery option in the cart. We're going to go to our code, and we're going to open the file called cart.js. So because we're modifying the cart, a best practice is to put the code inside this file. This file should contain all the code that manages the cart. So we're going to scroll down to the bottom, and we're going to add a new function. So let's type function, and let's name it update delivery option, brackets and curly brackets. So when we update a delivery option, we need to know the product that we want to update, as well as the delivery option that we chose. So we're going to need two things for this function: the product ID and the delivery option ID. So the steps to do this is, first we're going to loop through the cart and find the product. And then we're going to update the delivery option ID of that product. So to find the product using the product ID, we already have some code for this. If we scroll up to the add to cart function, we have this code, which takes a product ID and finds the matching product in the cart. So let's just make a copy of this code. We're going to select it, right-click copy, and then paste it into our new function. So down here, right-click and paste. So this will give us the cart item that matches this product ID and save it in this variable. Next, each cart item has a property called delivery option ID. So we're just going to update that property. So down here, we can just type the code matching item dot delivery option ID and make it equal to the delivery option ID that we give to this function. So delivery option ID. And lastly, because we updated the cart, we should save it to local storage. So we can use this function we created earlier, save to storage, and brackets. Now let's save. Now that we have this function, let's use it on the checkout page. So first let's export it so we can use this in another file. We're going to export this function and save, and then open checkout.js. And then in our project, we need to add event listeners to each of these delivery options, so we run some code when we click them. So inside our code here, we're going to scroll to the HTML for each delivery option, which is right here. And then we're going to add a class, so we can select it using the DOM, js-delivery-option. And then we'll add an event listener to these. So we'll scroll down, and down here, we'll add the event listener using document.query selector all brackets and a string. We'll select that class we just created using .js-delivery-option, and then dot for each brackets and a function. So for each option, we're going to add an event listener and listen for clicks. So let's just call each of the options an element. So for each of these elements, we're going to element.add event listener brackets, and we're going to listen for clicks, comma, and we're going to run this function when we click it. So as we said, the first thing we'll do is to update the delivery option ID in the cart. So now let's import that function that we created earlier. We're going to scroll to the top, and we're already importing from the cart. So to import something else, we're going to add a comma, and we're going to import that function update delivery option. So now let's scroll back down and use it in our code. So here, when we click a delivery option, we're going to update delivery option, brackets. Now we said we need to give this function two things: the product ID that we want to update it for, as well as the delivery option ID that we picked. But how do we get these two values? And the answer is, if we scroll up, here we have access to the product ID, and we also have access to the delivery option ID. So we can use data attributes to attach it to this element here. So let's create a data attribute, data-product-id equals double quotes, and insert the product ID, which is matching product.id. And we're also going to use a data attribute for the delivery option, data-delivery-option-id equals double quotes. And we're going to insert the delivery option here. So delivery option.id and save. Next, let's scroll back down. And then here, we're going to get those values out of the data attributes by using const, and let's use the shorthand property here for practice, curly brackets equals the element dot data set. And then out of the data attributes, we're going to get the product ID, comma, as well as the delivery option ID. As a reminder, this is a shorthand property. It does the same thing as the code down here, but it's just a shortcut. Now let's save and try out the project. We'll go back, and here, if we click the second delivery option and then refresh the page, you'll notice that now this one is checked and the date here is correct. So that's how we make this section interactive. We just update the cart, and then when we refresh the page, it will regenerate the HTML based on the new cart. Now let's save our code into Git. We'll go back and open the Git section, and then it will tell us in cart.js, we added this function for updating the delivery option, and in checkout.js, we imported that function, and then at the bottom, we added some event listeners and data attributes, and we use that function to update the cart. Now let's add a message describing our changes. Make delivery options interactive and commit. Next, when we select a delivery option, we need to update the page. So right now in our project, when we click a delivery option, we need to refresh the page for the text to be updated. So what we're going to work on now is when we click this, we want the page to update immediately. So far in this course, the way we solve this problem is once we click this, we're going to use the DOM to get this element here and then update the text directly. However, the problem with this approach is that we need to update the page one by one. And later, there might be lots of places on the page that we need to update. For example, when we change a delivery option, we also need to change the numbers here on the right. So there's potentially a lot of things that we need to update one by one, and it's easy to make a mistake or forget something. So now we're going to learn a better way to update the page. We'll go back to our code, and let's open checkout.js again. And notice, if we scroll up, here we already have all of this code that takes our data and generates the HTML. So another way to update the page is after we update our data, we just need to rerun all this code and regenerate all this HTML. So let's give this a try. First, we're going to put all of this code inside a function so we can rerun it. We're going to scroll to the top, And let's put this in a function by typing function, and let's call it render order summary, brackets and curly brackets. So the word render just means to display on the page. And we're going to call this section the order summary. So this function should display the order summary on the page. Next, we're going to put all of this code inside our new function. So let's just remove this curly bracket here. And let's actually select all of this code, and we're just going to reformat it by pressing Tab and adding an indent. And then at the end, we're going to add back that closed curly bracket to finish the function. So all we did was we put all of our code inside a function. And then at the bottom, let's run this function because we still need to run all this code at the start of our page. So we're going to type render the order summary and brackets. So this shouldn't change anything because we're just running the same code, but now it's just in a function. Let's save and check. And everything's still working, so that's good. So now let's go back into our code. And this time, to update the page, instead of using the DOM to update the page directly like we did up here, we're just going to rerun all of this code and regenerate all the HTML. So after we update the data, we're going to rerun the code using render order summary and brackets. Now let's save and try it out. So here, let's say we start off with the first delivery option. If we click the third delivery option, you'll notice that the date up here updates automatically. If we click the second delivery option, it updates automatically as well. So that's a better way to keep the page up to date. Instead of using the DOM and changing the HTML directly one by one, we just update the data and then regenerate all of this HTML. So let's go back into our code, and there's two things that I want to point out here. So notice that we put our event listeners into this big function. And that's because when we're regenerating all the HTML, we're essentially deleting the previous HTML and replacing it. So we need to add the event listeners again. And the second thing I want to point out is that inside the render order summary function, we can call render order summary again. So a function can actually call itself or rerun itself. And this feature is called recursion. It's useful when a function needs to rerun all of its code. So now let's save our changes into Git. We'll open the Git section, and it will tell us in checkout.js, we basically moved all of our code into this function. And then at the bottom, we call the function at the start of the page, and we also call the function when we select a delivery option. So now let's add a message describing our changes. Regenerate HTML when updating delivery option and commit. So the technique we just used, where we update the data and then regenerate all the HTML, this technique is called MVC. MVC stands for Model View Controller, and it's a popular technique in software engineering. In MVC, we split our code into three parts. The first part is the model. This is all the code that saves and manages the data. So in our project, all the code in this data folder is called the model because this code saves and manages our data. The second part of MVC is the view. This is code that takes the data and displays it on the page. So in our project, if we open checkout.js and scroll to the top, here we have code that takes our data and then generates all the HTML. So this code is called the view. The last part of MVC is the controller. So this runs some code when we interact with the page. So in our project, at the bottom, these event listeners here would be called the controller. because they do something when we interact with the page or with the view. So in MVC, we divide our code into these three parts, and then they interact with each other in a loop. First, we use the model to generate the view. So in our code, that's what we did here. We took the model or the data, which is our cart, and then we generated the HTML or the view. Then, when we interact with the view, it will run the controller. So that's what we did at the bottom here. When we interact with the page, we run some code. Then the controller will update the model. So that's what we did here. Inside the controller, we just updated our data using this function. And finally, we use the updated model to regenerate the view. So that's what this code does. It takes the updated data and then regenerates all the HTML, or regenerates the view. So that's how MVC works. Instead of updating the page directly with the DOM, we just update our data and then regenerate all the HTML. So we use MVC because doing this makes sure that the page always matches the data. So MVC is known as a design pattern. It's a way to organize and design our code. In the future, you might use a technology called a JavaScript framework to build websites. Many JavaScript frameworks are based on MVC, so it's useful to know how it works. Okay, now that we learned the MVC design pattern, let's do some practical examples using MVC. We're going to open our project again to the checkout page, and we're going to create this payment section on the right. Now, before we start, if we look at our code in this checkout.js file, you'll notice that we already have a lot of code here. Instead of adding even more code to this file, let's actually split this up into two different files. So one file will be responsible for this left section, and then one file will be responsible for this right section. We're doing this to keep our code more organized, and so that we don't have too much code in one file. So let's go back, and let's create two new files for the checkout page. So up here, we'll create a file, and let's call this one the order summary.js, and press enter. And let's create another file for the right section, and let's call this one the payment summary.js, and press enter. Now, both of these files are related to the checkout page. So let's create a folder and group them together. We'll create a new folder up here, and let's call it checkout, and press enter. And we're going to move these two files into this new folder. So we'll move that, and we'll move that. Next, let's open checkout.js, and let's move all of this code into the order summary. So we'll press Ctrl A or Command A to select all the code, and then right-click, cut, and then in here, we're going to right-click and paste. Now, there's a few things that we need to fix here. So first, our checkout.html file is still loading checkout.js. So we actually need to run this function inside checkout.js instead of inside here. So let's actually remove this and save. And we're going to scroll to the top. And let's export this function so we can run it inside here. So we'll type export and save. And then inside checkout, we're going to import curly brackets, the render order summary function from a string. And to locate this file, we're going to type a / first. That means to start from the current folder, and we'll go into the checkout folder. Checkout/order summary.js. And finally, we're going to run this function when we load the page. So render order summary and brackets. and save. Another thing we need to fix is if we open ordersummary.js, we moved this file into a folder. So now all of these file paths need to be updated. // is now inside the scripts folder, and we can't find a data folder anymore. So this is going to cause an error. So to find the data folder, we need to get out of the checkout folder, and then we need to get out of the scripts folder. So we need to get out of two folders. So we'll just add an additional .. And then same thing for this. We'll add another .. And for the utils, now we need to get out of the checkout folder and then into the utils folder. So we'll change this to .. utils. And then for here, we're going to go out an additional folder, so another .. and save. So now let's check if this still works. We'll go to our project and refresh and try it out. And the page still works because we're still running all of the same code, but we just organized it into its own file. So now let's open Git and save our changes. So it's going to tell us that in here, we removed all this code, and then we separated it into the order summary file and the payment summary file, which we're going to work on next. So let's type a message describing our changes, move order summary into its own file, and commit. Now let's start creating the payment summary on the right side. So in our code, let's open paymentsummary.js. And just like the order summary, let's put all our code in a function so we can regenerate the HTML if we need to. So we'll type function, and let's call it render payment summary, brackets and curly brackets. And let's just console.log the string payment summary, just to make sure it's working. So we'll save, and let's export this function and then run it inside checkout.js. So export, save, and then in checkout.js, at the top, we're going to import, curly brackets, the render payment summary function from a string, the current folder, go into the checkout folder, and the payment summary.js file. And then at the bottom, we're going to run the function. So render payment summary brackets and save. So let's go back to our project and open the console, right-click, inspect the console, and we'll see the message payment summary. So now we know that our code here is working and the export is working correctly. Now let's remove this code and actually build the payment summary. As always, we're going to do 3 steps. Save the data, generate the HTML, and make it interactive. So let's start with saving the data. In MVC, this is called the model. So if we go to our project, for this section, the data that we need is just to calculate these numbers here. So let's start by calculating this first number here, which is the cost of the products. To calculate this, we can loop through the cart, and for each product in the cart, we can multiply the product's price times the quantity, and then add everything together. Now let's convert these steps into code. We'll go to our project, and inside the payment summary file, first we need to get the cart, so let's import it. Import curly brackets, the cart from the string, and we'll locate cart.js. So first we'll go out of the checkout folder, .. and then go out of the scripts folder, .. and then into the data folder, data/cart.js, and save. And now we're going to loop through the cart. So we can type cart.forEach brackets and a function. And let's name the parameter cart item. So for each cart item, we have the product ID and the quantity. So we need to multiply the product's price times the quantity. So first, we need to use the product ID and get the full product details. And we already have some code for this. Inside ordersummary.js, if we scroll down, here we have some code that takes a product ID and finds the matching product. Now, instead of copy and pasting this code, let's actually put this into a function so we can reuse this, and we'll practice some modules. So let's select this code and right-click and copy it first. And then let's go into the products.js file. And at the top, we're going to create a function so we can reuse that code. So let's type function, and let's name it getProduct, brackets and curly brackets. And we're going to give this function the product ID that we're looking for. And then let's paste the code we copied earlier. Right-click and paste. So this finds the matching product using the product ID. And then at the end of the function, let's return the matching product. So we can use this outside of the function. So now let's export this function so we can share it across files. So export and save. First, we'll go to the order summary. And at the top, let's import that function. So we're already importing from products.js. We're going to import something else using a comma, the getProduct function. And then down here, instead of all this code, we're going to run that function. So we'll make this equal to getProduct and run the function. And we need to give the function the product ID. So let's just give that here, product ID. And because we're no longer updating this variable, we can change from let to const and save. Let's go to our project to make sure everything's still working. So that looks good. And now let's use this function inside paymentsummary.js. So the same thing, we will import curly brackets, the getProduct function from a string, and we'll go to the data folder, //data/ and products.js. And let's run that function to get the full product. So get product brackets, and then each cart item has the product ID. So we're going to give it to the function, cart item.product ID. And let's save this product in a variable so we can use it for our calculations. So const product equals getProduct. So now, as we said, we're going to multiply the product's price by the quantity. So down here, we can do product, and it has a property called .price cents, and we're going to multiply it by the cart item, and this has a property .quantity. And the last step is to add all of these together. So outside of the loop, let's create a variable to save the result of adding them together. Let's type let, and we'll name it product price cents equals, and we'll make it 0 to start. And then every time we loop through the cart, we're going to add this to this variable. So we'll type product price cents plus equals this value here. And that's how we calculate the cost of the products. So at the bottom, let's console.log the product price cents, just to make sure that this is working. We'll save, and in our project, we're going to check the console, and it will give us this number here. And this number should match the number on the page, except it's in cents. And assuming you also have 2 socks and 1 basketball in your cart. Okay, so that's how we calculate this first number here. Now let's calculate the second number, which is the cost of shipping. So to calculate this, we're going to loop through the cart and add all the shipping costs together. So let's go into our code. And here, we're already looping through the cart. So instead of creating another loop, let's just calculate the shipping cost in the same loop. So let's create some new lines. And each cart item has a property delivery option ID. So we need to use this ID to get the full delivery option, which has the price. So in the order summary, we also have this code that takes the delivery option ID and finds the full delivery option. So again, let's create a function to share and reuse this code. So first, let's select this code, and we'll right-click and copy. And let's go to the delivery options.js file. And then at the bottom, we'll create a function. Let's call it get delivery option, brackets and curly brackets. And we'll give this function the delivery option ID. And inside here, we'll right-click and paste the code that we copied earlier. So this will take this ID and get the delivery option from this array. And let's return this delivery option so we can use it outside of this function. And just to be safe, let's also give this a default value if we don't find a delivery option. So we'll use the default operator or, and let's make the default value the first delivery option. So delivery options square bracket 0. So now let's export this and save. And then inside order summary, we'll use this function. So at the top, we're already importing from delivery options. So we'll type a comma and get delivery option. And then down here, instead of running all this code, we'll select it and make this equal and run the function get delivery option, brackets. And we'll give it this delivery option ID. Delivery option ID. And we can change from let to const, since we're not changing this variable. So now let's save, and let's use this function inside payment summary as well. So in here, at the top, we'll import curly brackets, the get delivery option function, from quotes, the data folder ... data / and the delivery options.js file. And now we'll run this function, get delivery option and brackets. And each cart item has a delivery option ID. So we'll put that into the function, cart item.delivery option ID. And let's save this in a variable, const delivery option equals. And now we can get the price for the delivery option using delivery option dot price cents property. And finally, we're going to add all these together. So at the top, let's create a variable to save the result. Let, we'll call it shipping price cents equals 0. And when we loop through the cart, we're going to do shipping price cents plus equals this delivery options price. And let's also console.log this to make sure it's working. So shipping price cents and save. Now let's go to our project and check the console. And this value here should be the same as adding these two numbers together in cents. So that's how we calculate the second number, the shipping price. So note that this $4.99 number is just a practice number right now. The actual shipping price should be the total of adding all the shipping prices together. The next number we need to calculate is the total before tax. So it's just adding these two numbers together. Inside our code, let's remove these console.logs and we'll create const total before tax cents and make it equal, and we'll add these two together. Product price cents plus shipping price cents. And the next number is the tax. So we're going to calculate a 10% tax on this number here. To calculate 10% of something, we can multiply this by 10 divided by 100. That's what percent means. So 10 divided by 100 is also equal to 0.1. So we can also multiply this number by 0.1. Let's go into our code, and we'll create a variable const tax cents, make it equal to the total before tax cents times 0.1, or 10%. Finally, to calculate the total, we're going to add these two numbers together. So const total cents equals the total before tax cents plus the tax cents. So that's how we calculate all the numbers in the payment summary. And now we have all the data that we need. Next, we're going to generate the HTML. In MVC, this is called the view. So at the bottom here, let's create a variable to store the HTML. Const payment summary HTML. And we'll make it equal to a template string. And then inside here, we're going to copy and paste the HTML. So let's open checkout.html. And we're going to scroll up until we find the class payment-summary. So we're going to generate all the HTML inside here. So let's actually select this HTML and move it into our JavaScript. So we'll select it up until this button, and then we can right-click, cut, and remove the new line, save, and then inside the payment summary, inside the string, we'll right-click and paste the HTML. And if we need to reformat, we can select these lines and press Tab a few times to reformat it. And save. Next, instead of using these same numbers every time, we're going to take the numbers we calculated up here and insert it into this HTML string. So instead of 42.75 every time, we're going to insert the product price cents. And let's give it some new lines to make it a little easier to read. Now remember that this number is in cents, and we want to display it as dollars. To do that, we already have a function for this. So in the utils/money.js file, we have a function format currency that displays it in dollars. So let's use this function inside payment summary. So at the top, let's import the function first. Import curly brackets, the format currency function from a string, and to locate this folder, we'll go out of the checkout folder, // the utils folder /money.js. And then down here, we're going to run the function format currency, open bracket and close bracket. So that's how we insert the product price into this HTML. So let's do the same thing with all of these other numbers here. So this one is the shipping price. So we can insert format currency brackets the shipping price cents. And let's give it some new lines to make it a little easier to read. Next, let's insert the total before tax. So we'll remove this number and insert format currency brackets the total before tax cents and new lines. And next is the tax. We'll remove this and insert format currency brackets the tax cents And we'll enter some new lines. And finally, the total. So we'll remove this, insert, format, currency, brackets, total cents, and add some new lines. And save. Now before we continue, I actually learned of a small issue with the format currency function. So let's open the money.js file. And I recently learned that this toFixed method has a small issue with rounding. So for some numbers that end in 5, it won't round the number properly. One way to fix this issue is to round the price cents first, so that this method doesn't have to do any rounding. So at the front here, let's just type math.round, open bracket and close bracket. So this is just a tricky issue that I discovered with the help of AI recently. We just need to add a little bit of code here to fix it. So now let's save this file and go back to payment summary. So now that we generated all this HTML and inserted our numbers into it, let's put this HTML on the page. So inside checkout.html, let's give this payment summary another class, js-payment-summary. And then we'll select this using the DOM. So now let's save this file. Inside payment summary, at the bottom, after we create the HTML, we're going to document.query selector, brackets and a string, and we'll select .js-payment-summary to get that element. And we'll change the HTML inside that element using .inner capital HTML, and we'll make it equal to the payment summary HTML that we just created. So now let's save and check our project. And now these numbers on the right should match what we have in the cart and the delivery options that we selected. So that's how we generate the HTML for this section here. Now let's save our changes into Git. We'll open Git, and it will tell us in checkout.html, we removed the HTML we created manually. In deliveryoptions.js, we created this shared function for finding the full delivery option, and the same thing in products.js for finding the full product. Inside checkout.js, we're now running all the code inside payment summary. In order summary, we're just using those shared functions that we created. And then in payment summary, we calculated the numbers and generated all the HTML. And finally, in money.js, we fixed a small bug related to rounding. Let's type a message to describe our changes. Save data and generate HTML for payment summary and commit. The last step is to make it interactive. In MVC, this is called the controller. Let's go to our project. And one thing we can make interactive in this section is the place order button. However, we haven't figured out how orders work yet. So we'll work on this in the next lesson. Another thing we can make interactive, however, is when we change the cart on the left, these prices should also update. So let's make this interactive. First, when we delete a product, the prices here should update. So let's actually practice using MVC to create this functionality. According to MVC, when we click delete, we should update the data and then regenerate all of this HTML. So let's get started and go to the code for the delete link. So this is in the order summary section. So in our code, let's open the order summary.js file. And we'll scroll down and find the event listener for the delete link, which is right here. When we click delete, First, we're going to update the data. So we already update the data using this function, remove from cart. And now the next step, according to MVC, is to just regenerate all the HTML. So to regenerate the HTML for the payment summary, we created this function at the top, render payment summary. So this will recalculate all the numbers and then regenerate the HTML. So let's import this function. In ordersummary.js, we'll scroll to the top, and down here we can import curly brackets, the render payment summary function from a string, and we'll locate the payment summary file. So it's in the same folder. So we're going to start with a // which is the current folder, the payment summary.js file. And now let's use this function in the event listener. So let's scroll down. When we click delete, we're going to update the data and then regenerate all the HTML using render payment summary brackets. Now let's save and go to our project. Focus on the numbers on the right here, and now let's click delete. And you'll notice that all of these numbers updated to match our new cart. So that's another example of using MVC. When we click delete, instead of using the DOM to change these numbers one by one, we just update the data and then regenerate all of the HTML. MVC makes sure that the HTML always matches the data, or that the view always matches the model. Let's do one last example of MVC for this lesson. When we change the delivery options here, we also want these numbers on the right to update. So let's find the code for the delivery options. Again, this is in the order summary section. So in our code, we'll open ordersummary.js, scroll down, and then here we updated the data, and then we're just going to regenerate the HTML for the payment summary using render payment summary and brackets. Now let's save and then look at our project, and let's try changing the delivery option here. And you'll notice the numbers on the right update automatically to match the cart. And that's it. We finished the checkout page. So now let's save our code into Git. We'll go into the Git section here, and inside order summary, we basically imported the render payment summary function, and then at the bottom, we used MVC. So when we click delete, we update the data or the model, and then we regenerate all the HTML or regenerate the view. Down here, same thing. When we click a delivery option, we update the data and then regenerate all the HTML. The last thing we're going to do is at the top of this file, we're going to remove this practice code that we use to learn external libraries. So let's open ordersummary.js. And at the top, we're going to remove this code and save. Now let's go back into Git, and that looks good. Finally, let's type a message describing our changes. Make payment summary interactive and commit. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we learned about external libraries, which is code that is outside of our project. We learned about the day.js external library, which helps us work with dates. We also learned how to use external libraries with JavaScript modules together, as well as the default export syntax. We created the delivery section of the checkout page. We learned MVC, which is a better way to design our code. And we created the payment section of the checkout page. Thanks for watching this course so far. If you want to support this channel, you can check out the premium version of my courses just like this one, where you can get a certificate of completion and a better learning platform. If you're interested in extra videos from me, more in-depth videos, and behind-the-scenes content, you can check out these links here. You can also support the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and sharing this video with others. Thanks again, and let's continue with the course. Here are some exercises to help you practice what we learned in this lesson. In the rest of this course, if you get an error in your project, but your code looks correct, you may have some bad data saved in local storage. To fix this, you can try running localstorage.clear in your console to remove everything from local storage, and then refresh the page. If you see an error like this, object object, that means that you saved something directly into local storage, but you have to json.stringify it first. So check your code to make sure that you're always stringifying before saving to local storage, and then clear your local storage and refresh the page. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to test our code. So when we're writing code, it's important to test our code to see if it's working correctly. And if you're working at a company in the future, you'll also be expected to test your code. So let's learn how to do that in this lesson. The easiest way to test our code is to just open the website and try out the code. For example, in our code here, let's open the file utils/money.js. And then inside this file, we have a function called format currency. So let's say we want to test format currency. How do we check if this is working correctly? So as I mentioned, the easiest way to test this is to just open our website and try out this code. So let's open the website. If you don't have the website open, you can right-click checkout.html and then click Open with Live Server. So on this website, we have a couple of prices here, as well as here. And we created these prices using the function format currency. So if we just look at the website, we can see that these prices look correct. And this tells us that the function format currency is working correctly. So that's one way to test that function. We just open the website and try it out. So this is called manual testing, when we manually open the website and try our code. So manual testing is really useful for quickly checking to see if everything is working. So now let's talk about the disadvantages of manual testing. One disadvantage is it's hard to test every situation. For example, here we just happen to have the number 2095 and we test with that. However, what if we want to test with different numbers, like the number 0, or a number that requires rounding, like 2000.5? In order to test all these situations, we have to manually set up our website so that our code runs with those numbers. So here we ran with 2095 as well as 0, so we covered those situations. However, we did not cover 2000.5, so we have to do a bunch of setup in order to test that situation. So as you can see, it takes a lot of time and effort to test different situations in our code. The second disadvantage of manual testing is that it's hard to retest the code. For example, if we change some of our code, how do we retest format currency and make sure that it's still working correctly? Well, we would have to open the website and set up all the situations again and retest all those situations manually. So this takes too much time and effort to retest the code. To solve these two problems, we're going to learn another way to test our code called automated testing. Automated testing basically means using code to test code. Instead of manually opening the website and clicking around to try our code, we're going to tell the computer to do these tests for us, and this will save a lot of time and effort. So let's go ahead and create our first automated test. We're going to go back to our code, and again, let's test this format currency function. To create an automated test, we're just going to write some code to test this function. So first, let's create a folder to group all of our test code together. We're going to click this icon to create a folder, and let's just name this tests and press enter. And we're going to move this folder, so we'll drag it to the top level here beside the HTML files. So we want the test folder to be beside the scripts folder. Next, let's click on the test folder, and we're going to create our first test file. We'll click this, and we're going to test format currency, which is inside the money.js file. So let's name this file money.test.js. So we know that this file contains tests for money.js. So let's press enter. And inside this file, we're going to write some code to test format currency. So first, let's import format currency so we can test it. At the top, we'll type import curly brackets format currency from a string. And from here, we're going to locate money.js. So we start out in moneytest.js, and we need to get out of the test folder. So we'll type .. to get out of this folder, and then we'll go into the scripts folder, scripts / and then into the utils folder, utils / and locate money.js. So as a reminder, format currency takes a number in cents, like 2,095 cents, and then converts it into dollars, like $20.95. So first, let's test this function using that number 2,095 as an example. We're going to run the function format currency brackets and give it 2,095. And now we're going to check if the result of this function is correct. To do that, we can just use an if statement. So we'll type if, open bracket, close bracket, and we said we expect format currency 2095 to give us the string 20.95. So we're just going to check if this is triple equals to the string 20.95 and curly brackets. And if these two are equal, that means the code is working correctly. So we're going to console.log the string passed to say that this test has passed. Now, if it is not equal to 20.95, we're going to say that this test has failed. So we're going to give it an else curly brackets, and then here we're going to console.log the string failed and save. And that's it. This is our first automated test. It checks if the result of this function is correct. If it is correct, we're going to display passed, and if it's not correct, we're going to display failed. Now let's run this test code. So remember, we can't run JavaScript files directly. We need to load this JavaScript file using an HTML file. So let's create an HTML file to run this test. Inside the tests folder, we're going to create a new file by clicking up here. And let's name this file tests.html and press enter. And in here, we're going to start by creating a basic HTML structure. So as a reminder, at the top, we'll type <! doc type space HTML greater than, and we'll create an HTML element. And then inside, we'll create a head element as well as a body element. And then inside the body, we're going to create a script tag to run JavaScript code. And we're going to give the script tag an attribute called src or source equals double quotes. And we're going to give it this JavaScript file to run, moneytest.js. And also, because this file uses import, we also need to add an attribute called type equals module to give this file access to JavaScript module features like import. So now let's save, and we're going to run this file in live server. So we're going to click it and then right click, open with live server. And then we're going to check the console by right clicking, inspect, and open the console. And our code displays the text passed. So if we look at our code and open moneytest.js, it's telling us that the result of this function matched what we expected, and this test passed. So that's how we run an automated test. We just load it like normal JavaScript. So as you can see, automated tests are pretty straightforward. We're just using code to test code. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that a disadvantage of manual testing is it's hard to test every situation. Now let's solve this problem using automated tests. So inside moneytest.js, if we want to test format currency in different situations or with different numbers, we can just add some more tests at the bottom. So at the bottom, let's create some new lines, and we'll just add another test using if, brackets and curly brackets. And inside here, let's test format currency with the number 0. So we'll type format currency brackets 0, and we expect this result to be the string 0.00. So we'll check if this triple equals the string 0.00. If this result matches, we're going to console.log the string passed. And if this result does not match, we're going to type else, curly brackets, and console.log the string failed. So that's how we test format currency in a different situation with the number 0. So now let's save and then go back to our test page, which is here, and then open the console, right click, inspect the console, and it will tell us that both of our automated tests passed. So as you can see, automated tests help us test our code in different situations very easily. This is a lot faster than manually opening our website and setting it up to test with different numbers. So let's go back to our code. And by the way, another name for a situation that we're testing is called a test case. So here, instead of saying we're testing 2 different situations, we usually say we're testing 2 test cases. Okay, now let's get more practice and add another test case. At the bottom of this file, we're going to create another if statement, if, brackets and curly brackets. And this time, let's test format currency, brackets, and we'll give it a number that requires some rounding. So when we calculate the 10% tax on our website, the result could be a decimal, like the number 2000.5. If we use the number 2000.5, this will convert into $20 and 0.5 cents. However, we can't have 0.5 cents. So we're going to round this up to 1 cent. So we're going to have $20.01. So let's check if this result triple equals the string 20.01. And if it is equal, we're going to console.log passed. And if it is not equal, else curly brackets console.log failed. And save. And open our test page and open the console. And you can see that all 3 of our test cases passed. And that's it. We just created 3 test cases for format currency using automated tests. Now let's go back to our code. And currently we have 3 test cases. And you might be wondering, how many test cases should we have? Generally, we create 2 types of test cases: basic test cases and edge cases. A basic test case just tests if the code is working or not. So here, our first test case is a basic test case. We use a normal number like 2095, and we see if format currency is working correctly. The second type of test cases that we should have are edge cases. This means we test the code with values that are a little bit tricky. They're on the edge of what our code can handle. For example, in our test here, the last 2 test cases are edge cases. 0 is sort of a special number that's not positive or negative, and 2000.5 is a number that requires some rounding. So these numbers are acceptable. We can use them with format currency, but they're a little bit tricky and on the edge of what our code can handle. So when creating test cases, make sure to create basic test cases as well as edge cases, if there are any edge cases. Now, we could have added another basic test case like format currency 1095. However, this is very similar to 2095. It's basically testing the same thing, so we don't need another test case like this. Generally, we should try to test something different in each test case. For example, an edge case that we have not tested is the number 2000.4. So this would check if the code rounds down correctly to $20.00. However, I'll leave creating this test case as an exercise. Now let's move on and talk about the second disadvantage of manual tests, which is it's hard to retest the code. Automated tests also solve this problem. For example, let's say that we change the format currency function. So inside util/money.js, let's say that we change the code and we remove this rounding code. So we remove math.round and the brackets here. And now after we change this code, how do we check if this code still works correctly? If we were only doing manual testing, we would have to open up the website, set up everything manually, and then click around to see if it's working. However, with automated testing, all we need to do is to rerun all of this test code, and it will instantly retest all of these cases. So let's go back to money.js and save this code, and then go into our test page and check our console. Right-click, inspect the console. And you can see that it instantly reruns all the test cases, and it tells us that the last test case failed. So automated tests make it really easy to retest our code after we make any changes. Okay, now we have another problem here. We can see that the test cases passed, and failed, but it's not clear which ones passed and which ones failed. We don't really have a name for these tests, so we don't know what they're doing. So that's what we're going to add next. We're going to give each of these tests a name. So let's go back to our code and open moneytest.js. And now we're going to give each of these test cases a name. So above the first test case, let's just console.log a string, and we're going to give this test a name. So the name should describe what this test is doing. So in here, let's just use the name converts cents into dollars. And that's how we give the test case a name. Let's do the same thing with the other two test cases. So down here, we're going to console.log brackets and a string, and we'll give the second test case a name. So this one tests the number 0. So let's use the name works with 0. So again, the name just describes what the test is doing. And let's do the same thing for the third test.